for BRAZ-TESOL Ribeirão Preto chapter. We had an amazing talk yesterday when we started the series of talks focusing on change. Hello, Felipe. Nice to see you here. We thought that this event could be a good opportunity for us to talk about transformation, how everything is transforming as we're facing as educators such difficult and challenging times. So our first talk with our great president of BRAZ-TESOL National Association focused on the transformation that we wish for our students. It focused on the autonomy of the learners in the classroom. Maybe some of you were able to follow the talk we had with Igor yesterday. As I said, it was a great opportunity for us to share ideas and to hear what Igor had to say. And today we will have an opportunity to address bilingual education and bilingualism. Specifically, the pathway that a teacher that works with English language teaching goes or has to go through in order to become a bilingual educator, in order to become someone who will be using in class English as a medium of instruction. It is my pleasure. I have some reminders before we start. It is my pleasure to receive a great friend of ours, Elisa Troncon, Dr. Elisa Troncon, tonight. She will be sharing her experience as a bilingual educator and the challenges she herself faced when transitioning from language teaching to bilingual education. Before I start, I have an invitation here that I want to share with everybody. If you're not a BRAZ-TESOL member, I want to invite you to join our great community of educators. BRAZ-TESOL is an amazing association, and by becoming a member, it will have access to exclusive benefits. BRAZ-TESOL was founded in 1986, and it is Brazil's largest association of teachers of English to speakers of other languages. It is a nonprofit organization with a membership of over 2,000 professionals. BRAZ-TESOL is an affiliate of TESOL International, IETEFL in the UK, and a member of the Southern Cone TESOL. The aims of our association are to foster and support research in the field of English language teaching, support teacher development programs in all types of teaching institutions in Brazil, promote studies in the area of English teaching and related fields, such as applied linguistics, social linguistics, use of technology, and second language acquisition, establish and maintain contacts with similar associations in other countries, especially TESOL, IETEFL, and the Southern Cone TESOL, as I mentioned when we started this introduction, and organize national and regional conventions, meetings, and seminars on topics related to teaching of English in Brazil. BRAZ-TESOL has recently incorporated topics on bilingual education, as I said, as it has become a hot topic in Brazil for educators that work with the English language. Not only the English language, of course, we know bilingualism is much broader than only teaching, only using English as a medium of instruction, as bilingual schools will offer different types of programs in different languages. Today we'll be specifically addressing English as a medium of instruction because it is the field of expertise of Dr. Elisa Troncon. It is my great honor to introduce the speaker that we have tonight. What
Sorry, everyone. I think we had some connection problems. So I'll carry on with our introduction of Elisa. All right. We thank you again for taking part of our event. We're very glad to have you with this very relevant and interesting session. So I'm going to read Elisa's description very briefly. So Elisa has worked as a teacher for more than 15 years. She's currently a bilingual teacher at a mainstream school in Ribeirão Preto, São Paulo, and she teaches the subject of science, following the guidelines provided by Cambridge Assessment International Education. She graduated in biology and she holds a master's and a doctorate degree. She has also got language certificates such as CAE and CPE, as well as teaching certificates such as TKT and TKT CLIL. She loves working as a teacher and she is especially fond of working with young learners. So Elisa, thank you again. The floor is yours. Have fun.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you all for having me here. It is a great pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to share a little bit of my work and what I have been doing for these past years. I'm going to share my presentation here. Is it okay? Can everybody see it? So today I'll talk about, thank you, transitioning from language to bilingual teaching. So as Rafael has already mentioned, I worked for more than 12 years as a teacher in a language school. And this is my third year working as a bilingual teacher, as a teacher in a school with a bilingual program, bilingual education. But then, what is bilingualism? So when I started working in a school with a bilingual program, I had never heard of this in this context before. And I noticed that many people have these doubts on what is bilingualism. So the idea here today is talk briefly about bilingualism, a little bit about the cognitive aspects of bilingualism, and then I'll talk a little about the differences between bilingual education and language education, and I'll share a little of my experience, how it was for me to transition from being a language teacher to being a bilingual teacher, a teacher for a bilingual school. And I hope to be able to give you some tips and suggestions on things that you could use when planning, preparing your lessons. And I'll talk a little about the difficulties that I faced when I started working as a bilingual teacher. So this is the idea here today. So bilingualism. What is bilingualism? What comes to your mind when you hear this word, bilingualism? So I'll give you a minute to think about this. If you want to share your thoughts and write something in the chat box. Okay, so, and I'll just share this comic stripe that I found it was really interesting. And I'll give you a minute to think about this. What is bilingualism? Feel free to send your comments, okay? I'll give you a minute. Okay, so Rafael, I'll ask you for your help. I am not able to see the chat box here, so if you wanna, if anyone has sent any ideas and if you want to share with us, I'll have to ask for your help here.
All right. I think people are feeling shy tonight.
Shy. Come on, guys, just to have a little interaction here, but it is okay. don't worry. So thank you, Rafael. What is bilingualism? So, according to this author, Beaton Beardsmore, in 1986, bilingualism would be the presence of at least two languages within one and the same speaker, remembering that the ability in these two languages may or may not be equal, and that the way two or more languages are used plays a highly significant role. So this is one of the definitions. There are many definitions to bilingualism. But in general terms, bilingualism implies that one needs to show functional capacity in two languages. Functional capacity, we'll get to this again later on. Okay? According to this same author, there are two types of bilingualism: receptive bilingualism and productive bilingualism. So the receptive bilingualism, means the way that they speak, the person receives, understands, decodes the information. So it would be this functional abilities related to understanding, decoding communication in either its spoken or written forms. So it would be listening, reading, understanding the idea, the message. And productive bilingualism would be individuals who show greater ability in productive abilities, like speaking and writing. We'll talk more about this later on too. Baker is a very important author, Colin Baker, in this field of bilingualism. And he talks a little about domains, the social context in which language is used. And the most critical domains, according to this author here, Fishman, would be one language, where one language is chosen over the other. The most critical domains would be people, place, and topic. So this means that the bilingual is able to choose the language that he wants to use depending on the person he's talking to, or the place he's at, or the topic of the conversation. So we can just to illustrate this a little bit. When talking about the domain people, think of a child who has a Brazilian mother and a French dad. Probably this child will learn to speak both languages at home. He will be a bilingual child. He will learn this very early in his life or her life, and he'll be able to choose which language will be better in certain situations. So if he's talking to the mom, probably this child will refer to Portuguese, and to the dad, probably this person will talk in French. This child will use French with the dad. Or the topic, some people rather use English instead of their native language when they are in the academic environment, for example, or when using technical terms at work or something like that. So this is just to give you some example of these domains. But the important thing is that the bilingual can choose the language that is going to be used. There are also some levels of ability, and according to Cummings, he considers these two levels of ability. One of them is BICS, that is basic interpersonal communication skills. This is the language that is used in everyday conversation. And CALP, the cognitive academic language proficiency, more complex structured language. It is used for academic subject-related topics, a little more complex language. And when we think of bilingualism, some terms may be important for us to understand a little bit of what happens here. One of them would be language interference. So language interference means that a child or the person acquiring the two languages can mix a little bit, mix the languages a little bit. So you can see elements of one language in the speaking or writing of the other. And then it could be like phonological interference, lexical interference, or grammatical interference. And that author that I mentioned, Colin Baker, he suggests that this term is not the best term to be used here because it might give you the idea of something negative here when using the languages. But he talks about language transfer, so transferring elements from one language to the other. And this might be a temporary situation in the development of the language, of the second language. And another term would be code switching. This would be the switching between languages. It could be switching a single word within a sentence, switching within a sentence, or switching from one sentence to the next sentence. And this could vary according to who is in the conversation, what the topic, of the conversation is, and what kind of context the conversation happens. And, uh, what would be the difference in general terms between interference and code switching? So in general, it would seem that interference is determined by internal linguistic factors and code switching determined by extra linguistic factors. Bilingual speakers with more than one language at their disposal may choose to use the whole repertoire of linguistic elements available. So this is, I think it is really important for a bilingual person to choose the language. And then talking a little about the cognitive aspects of bilingualism. From the early 1800s to the 1960s, there were lots of disadvantages of bilinguals over monolinguals. And these studies were based on IQ scores. But then, later on, these studies were considered invalid because there was not enough scientific evidence to show the disadvantages of bilinguals over monolinguals. And these were very limited. The studies were very limited. And considering the IQ only, it's like a test, pen and paper, and what you have, what are the results there. So they were considered invalid. And these two authors here, Peel and Lambert, in 1962, their study started showing the benefits of bilingualism. And these were very important. According to Baker, these were very important because they started seeing the brain, the thinking, the way the person thinks, organizes the ideas. And then they were like the first authors to talk about these benefits. And now we know that bilingualism can be related to cognitive flexibility, metalinguistic awareness, and language sensitivity. Cognitive flexibility, also known as divergent thinking, it would be the capacity to envision multiple perspectives to find solutions to a particular problem. Metalinguistic awareness, the capacity to evaluate linguistic structures more analytically, so paying more attention to linguistic structures. Communicative sensitivities, bilinguals tend to adjust their communicative language functions to the needs of their audience. So they know what to use and how to use depending on who they are talking to, who is in the conversation. Also, to mention some aspects of bilingualism. Bilinguals are better in dealing with complex mathematical and spatial problem solving. They show superiority in scientific problem solving. They are better in developing concepts of number due to the high level of attention, and they need to be attentive. First, they need to be attentive to which language is being spoken and which language they are going to use at that particular moment. They tend to present lower rates of memory loss due to aging and delay in showing signs of dementia and in the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So many different studies came after Pugh and Lambert's study showing the positive or the benefits of bilingualism. So now, talking a little bit about bilingual education versus language education. So I'd like you to think about this. If you are a language teacher and if you are interested in becoming a bilingual teacher, think about your practice, think about your lessons, how you teach, how you motivate your students, how do you make your students produce language. Think about your practice. How is it? This was something new for me. It was difficult in the beginning. It was a little difficult to change my mindset because I had been working as a teacher for language schools for many years, and this was a challenge for me. To talk about these two types of education, I would like to mention something first. Second language acquisition. How do children acquire a second language, or how do people in general acquire a second language? And here there is a really nice video. You might be familiar with this. It is from Professor Stephen Krashen, and he talks about second language acquisition, and he provides some examples. So he teaches two different lessons. He's going to teach the same thing, but two different ways. And then, in which way do you learn better? This is the idea of the video here. I don't think I'll be able to play the video right now, but I'll leave you the link in the chat box so you can watch this video. It's really short, it's just about 3 minutes, and it is really worth watching. It is really nice. But what he says in his theory of second language acquisition is basically this. Acquisition, for someone to acquire language, comprehensive input is crucial and necessary ingredient for the acquisition of a language. What does it mean? It means that we acquire language if we understand what people say, if it is meaningful for us. So acquisition requires meaningful interaction. So our students need to understand what we are saying. It needs to be meaningful to them. And this is something really that was really important for me to understand. These things I got from a website that I can share the link later on. And it is really nice. And Baker also mentioned this in his book. And according to Baker, language is not
Elisa,
produced. Yes.
I'm sorry. I have some people here asking for you to share the link of this Professor Stephen Krashen. So if we can do it later for everybody. So don't worry. We'll be sharing the link with you all when Elisa finishes. It is a very nice talk, and we'll make that link available to you on the chat.
I have the link here, but I can't open the chat. So,
Well, we can do it before, as soon as you finish, we can share the link to
okay,
everyone.
okay, I have the link ready here, but as I can see the chat box, I'm not sending the link, but we'll do this later. All right. Can I continue?
Yes.
And according to Baker, language is not produced in a vacuum. It is enacted in changing dramas. As props and scenery, audience, co-actors, the play and roles change, so does the language. And as the theater and stage where we act changes, so does our use of two or more languages. So I think this is a really nice line or paragraph, and this is related to what I want to show you here. When talking about bilingual education, routine is very important, and it is really, really important to set context. So here, I have a picture here in one of our kindergarten lessons, and we were talking about things in town. And two of these things were the bus stop, and we also mentioned the school bus. So we were setting the context. We are trying to get students students involved, students motivated to learn, and the importance of routine. I remember when I was teaching at language schools that surprise was an important element there. We could not give everything that we would have in that lesson for the students. So it was like, let's let the students be curious. What are we doing today? But when working with bilingual education, it is really important to set the routine and to tell students what we are doing in that lesson. So students don't get anxious. If they are less anxious, I think they are more willing to learn. I think they get a little more motivated and they feel a little more comfortable. So it is really important. And context would be the key to acquisition of languages, of any languages. Understanding what is going on, and then we can think of Professor Stephen Krashen's lines again. We only acquire language when it is meaningful to us, when we understand the messages. Bilingual education is about teaching subjects. It's not about teaching English as a subject, as we have in a language school. It is teaching subjects using English. English would be the medium of instruction. So English will come naturally. I'm talking about English because this is what we have been doing, but it could be any other language, any other second language. It will come naturally, okay? And then a question, should students speak English all the time? I don't know. Feel free if you wanna say yes or no in the chat box. Someone can tell me. Maybe Rafael can help me here. But one thing I can say is that when I worked for language schools, students had to speak English all the time. And I remember that there were lots of strategies that we would use so that the students wouldn't speak English at all. Like, for example, writing a word on the board, like English or no Portuguese, and start erasing letters. So, as the student spoke Portuguese, erase a letter. So we would like penalize students for using Portuguese and not using English. But what about in this context of bilingual education? Should they speak English all the time? And I would say no, not really. Which kind of bilingualism is more likely to emerge from Brazilian classrooms? So we talked about this in the beginning. We have the receptive bilingualism and the productive bilingualism. What kind is more likely to emerge? So it would be the receptive bilingualism. So these two could be connected here. Students don't need to speak English all the time. Depending on their age or uh, abilities in English, or if they are familiar with the language or not, or the inputs they receive, they could not feel comfortable in speaking English. So, as we are teaching subjects, they might understand. If they understand what you are talking about, the messages that you want to give, the subjects that you are explaining, and they want to give an answer in Portuguese, why not? It is important to get this student motivating and participating of your lesson. And then receptive bilingualism will come first. So students will first listen to the language, they are going to become familiar with the language, and then they're going to recognize the language first so that they are ready to produce something. So they can answer questions in Portuguese or in their native language. And then I would like to show you some things. I'm going to show you just some examples of students answering some questions here. Look at this. This one, we were talking about shadows. We had studied light, and then we were talking about how shadows are formed, if shadows change, if shadows get big or small, depending on the distance of the light source. And then we have this. The children go inside, they come back out to the playground 3 hours later. They stand in the same places and stand in the same way. Their shadows have changed. Describe two ways their shadows have changed. And we have here the shadows aumentam and change the position. We can understand what this student is saying, right? The shadows are going to get big and change the position. But they are mixing here Portuguese, and here they are relying on phonology, on the sound of the words to give their answer. Is it wrong? Can we say that this is not right? This is wrong. Here, some other examples. 3 foods that are made by using evaporation. Pés grape for raisins, yes. Pés grape, damasco, and tâmara seca. Okay. It is really nice because the student understood the idea here. He knows what he has to answer here. And we're talking about evaporation. It is science. We are teaching science. But he's able to express himself and talks about and answer the question. Again here, banana, dry, kiwi, dry, apple, dry. Right? And then think of an example when evaporation is not useful to us. When you dash a cup of water at the sun to do something and have minus water. The answer was not the answer I expected here, but the student was motivated. He was trying to express himself. He used the English that he knew to give this answer, and he mixed. He didn't know how to say deixar. So, right? And this one is also really nice. I'll give you a minute to read and see if you can understand this message. This one was in a colleague's class, and they were talking about different medicine and I think kinds of medicine, ointment or tablets or things like that. And then there was a question, and the kid answered like this. For you to try to understand what this person was saying. So the medicines can help our body on the correct quantity, and another day can kill you. So again, phonology here, trying to acquiring language using the sounds of the language and trying to produce something here. It was really nice. I think it's an amazing example. And then bilingual education is student-centered. When we prepare our lessons, we have to think of the student or of the group that we are dealing with. And I think Igor mentioned this yesterday, right? I forgot the name of the theory, Severa, right? So it's not really that we offer kids some support, but it is student-centered. It's not teacher-centered. The teacher is not the focus here. It is the students. They are going to learn by seeing, by doing, by touching, and it is a practical approach, hands-on. This is really important. We are setting the context. We are making students involved. We are trying to get students involved in the lesson so that they feel comfortable and they learn to produce language later on. So the language will come as a consequence. And I would like to share with you some ideas for lessons in this part of tips and suggestions, how we can make our lessons more practical or using this approach, hands-on. So here, studying colors, we can do this with kindergarten. We have students that are 3-year-old or 3 to 5-year-old, our kindergarten groups. And then we can do some really simple things, but they are so impressed that they learn by doing it. So we can get, for example, water in plastic cups with some drops of food coloring. So we can get the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, and in front of them, or they can do it themselves. They can mix the colors in the cups and see how other colors can be formed. So we are teaching colors here, primary colors, mixing of colors. Also, there is this really nice experiment, the color changing milk. I don't know if you are familiar with this, but you put some milk in a cup or in a tray and add some drops of food coloring. And then we get here, we got the cotton swabs. You dip this in washing up liquid, in detergent, and then you just put this in the milk and you will see like the colors are moving. It is a really nice way to show colors, to teach colors, mixing of colors. Studying plants. This activity we also did with kindergarten students. We were talking about how plants grow and what plants need to grow. So this poster here, they had to put the things in the right order, in the right place, starting from a seed, and they would watch the carrot growing. And what do plants need? Sun and water to grow. And then we planted some carrot seeds so they could take this home and watch the plants grow. And they were really excited because they could take something home to show mommy and daddy, and they would water it every day or every 2 days. We gave them the instructions on how to take care of their carrots. And this was an activity with first graders, continuing studying plants. So they could observe the parts of a plant, the roots, the stem, the leaves and flower. And again, they love doing these kind of things. And if you give them some magnifying glasses, they go crazy and they get really happy, anxious for the lesson, and really motivated. Studying leaves, so we continued studying botanics here. This was a third grade activity. They, I took them out of the class for them to collect some leaves and to observe the variety of leaves. And this was a sorting activity. So they would have to sort the leaves according to shape or size. So they came up with the ideas on how to sort the leaves, and each group sorted in their own ways. And they are learning about leaves and shapes and sorting in English and everything, a little bit of everything here. And a suggestion: take students out of the classroom if possible. Um, I am really lucky because I work in a very big private school, and it is really huge. There are lots of different gardens that we can explore, and the kids love doing that. And after this, they made some leaf rubbings, like using crayons and a piece of paper for them to have a record, to keep a record of the leaves that they have collected. This was with fifth grade studying flowers. So continuing talking about plants, we could show them flowers and dissect some flowers for them to observe all the parts. And they had to draw, like writing a report, a science report, draw and label all the parts of the flower. And what happens a lot is sometimes they learn the technical terms in English before learning these in Portuguese. So when they have a science class in Portuguese, they can say, they usually say the name of the things in English, the things that they learned. Studying senses, lots of things can be done here. For example, a taste test, blindfolded, tasting different food. Eye test, you can print this easily, and they have a lot of fun. Or maybe working with some senses, they can smell, they have to guess what the smell is. Or even a field walk, a five senses field walk, where they have the opportunity to go out of the classroom and hear things, touch things, smell, taste, see, and then they can draw the things that they could sense. Studying materials, really simple stuff that we can find in our houses, but they love touching things, smelling things, listening to things, see if it makes noises, and if it is hard or soft or shiny or dull. And then you can work uh, with different vocabulary here. But we were studying materials. Sorting activity here. Here they had to separate the materials and say if they were shiny or dull. I think this was the activity here. And everybody was working together and motivated. We can see that they are happy when they are doing these things, when they are touching things. Studying evaporation or condensations as another example, putting 2 cups of water in different places, observing the water level. So what happened here? Water evaporated. Where did the water go? And here, a very simple experiment to show evaporation and condensation of water. Just as a curiosity, I'm just about to finish here. This first one here, warm place and cool place, I did this last week online. So all the students got the materials ready to be used in our lesson, and then we put 100 mLs of water in both plastic cups, and one of them went outside in the warm place so they could observe that the water had evaporated. Studying light, taking students outside to see their shadows, how shadows are formed, They have a lot of fun in these things. And here was a shadow puppet show, and they could create a dialogue. And there was a princess and a prince and a dinosaur and a butterfly. Of course, this was a girls' group, and we had the boys ones here. A soldier that had lost an arm fighting the war, and Hitler is here too. So they personalize these two when they have the chance. They personalize, and this is really nice because it is meaningful to them, and it is something that they will remember. Or even studying maths using some hula hoops, and they can make a Venn diagram here using some flashcards, or even using some objects and hula hoops, so that they can see a diagram in front of their eyes. It's not just the book and the board. Just to sum up here, according to Garcia, then these are the main differences between bilingual and language education. That in bilingual education, the academic goal is to educate students bilingually, while in language education, it is the competence in the additional language. The use of English is as a medium of instruction, and it is the subject in language education. And the pedagogical emphasis in bilingual education would be teaching language and the content of different subjects. But language comes naturally. And it would be the language instruction in language education for language schools. How can we assess students' knowledge? Formative assessment, portfolio, it has to be done in a daily basis. Summative assessment does not work very well here. It does, but not as well as formative assessment. Some of the difficulties. Students of different levels in one classroom. This happens in language schools too, but here they have different background, different input. They have received the language in different ways until they get to study these subjects. Teacher ready to teach content, not only language, but science, maths, history, other subjects. And I think I would say that the most difficulty was the time. We need time to plan our lessons and prepare our lessons. Even if we are using some objects, some materials that we can find in our houses, we need time to organize these things and to have the lesson ready for the students. I have a list of references here, so if you are interested, I can share some with you later. But if I had to suggest a book, it would be this by Colin Baker, The Foundations of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism. Has a lot of things on bilingualism. And I'm going to leave you here with my email and my Instagram account. And I would like to thank you very much. It was great to be here. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than glad to answer them. And I'm sorry I took a little longer.
Lisa, thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. I see that many people here are posting comments on how useful the ideas for young learners will be. I believe bilingual education, for sure, bilingual education is a fashion in Brazil. It has become a big fashion. So I think it was important that you referred to bilingual education in science when you started your presentation so that everybody can be on the same page and understand what bilingual education is about. So I think some terminology is really important here so that everybody will understand what bilingual education really is. And another very important thing that is going on right now in Brazil is the discussion on the guidelines that are for bilingual education, the regulations for bilingual education proposed by CNE, Conselho Nacional de Educação. So I've seen many seminars on bilingual education and discussions going on because we'll probably have some sort of legal regulations for bilingual schools in Brazil. Okay, I think we still have a few minutes for questions, so I would like to check if our audience has questions. I do have a question here coming from Ribeirão Preto. We have 10 minutes for questions, so I encourage you to send your questions for us to continue this conversation. And the first question is coming from Lívia Maria Elisa from Ribeirão Preto. As you said, as you mentioned, that you worked as a English language teacher for a long time at a school, and then you transitioned, becoming a bilingual educator using English as a medium of instruction. What do you think the start should be? How did you start preparing to become a bilingual teacher?
Well, I guess reading a little about bilingualism helps a lot. Understanding this idea of bilingual education. And I didn't have the opportunity to do this when I started, but now I would recommend taking a look at second language acquisition, these ideas for second language acquisition. But I would, well, reading is nice, but I would try to change the mindset here and keep in mind that this practical approach is really important, and that language to be acquired has to be meaningful for students. I would try to keep this in mind and try to change my mindset and try to look at the things. What am I going to teach today? How can I make this a practical activity? So I think this would be the most important things. I'm not sure, did I answer the question, Rafael? But I think it would be this, changing the mindset and understanding what happens here.
And you said you were a English language teacher for how long?
I think for more than 12 years.
For more than 12 years. So I imagine that transitioning is not easy because you come from a context that might be very different from what you have now.
Yes. Of course, we have to prepare. Sorry, Rafael. Of course, I had to prepare lessons when working for language schools. We have to study and prepare our lessons, but it is a different kind of preparation here because of this practical approach that I think is the most important thing when talking about bilingual education.
There is a second question here, Elisa, and it relates to the use of the TPR technique in every class. So just for everybody to understand what TPR is about, I have a very short description here. Of course, I'm not going to address that in depth because we don't have the time that we would need here. But TPR is basically a method of teaching language and vocabulary concepts by using physical movement to react to verbal input. So do you get to use TPR in class? And how do you do that? What do you have to do to engage those students physically in your lessons?
Well, as we are working with hands-on, a practical approach, students move a lot during the lesson. So this, I think this is pretty much the same as the kinesthetic approach, isn't it? The kinesthetic method where they learn by moving, by doing. And I think we do this a lot because it is not the students don't sit down for the lesson and stay seated for the whole lesson. This never happens. They have things to do. They are going to touch, they are going to feel, they are going to observe, they are going to move around. Of course, that some kids need to move more than others. Some kids can't stay still, not even when we ask them to. So in this case, we have to try and find them something else, help us in any way, and giving them the opportunity to move a little more and still having them alert or motivated in the lesson. So I think they never stand still. They usually move, they touch things, they see things.
I think it is a very important aspect to consider because my understanding is that you need to have support from the school because you won't have the same type of lesson that everybody's expecting you to deliver. It won't be a language lesson, a typical language lesson. So bilingual education is a different type of program, especially for very young learners, because and my understanding is that they have to refer to concrete stuff, to concrete objects in the classroom in order to develop language. Is that correct?
Yes, and Rafael, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but I consider myself privileged because I'm very lucky to be able to do this working where I work. I work for Colégio Santa Úrsula. I don't know if all of you know Colégio Santa Úrsula, but it is a regular school in Ribeirão Preto. It is a private school, and they are really supportive, I think. Actually, they have always given a lot of support to the BRAZ-TESOL events too, right? And we have a lot of support from the school to work like this and to have this practical approach.
There are two very interesting questions here. The first one referring to bilingual education in public schools in Brazil, which is something that I honestly would like to see, because what we have nowadays is bilingual education in private institutions. So it's wonderful that we can offer bilingual education to students who are able to afford this type of program, but also public schools also should be regarded. I think the discussions on bilingual education now by Conselho Nacional de Educação are a good indication that we might be thinking about bilingual education in public institutions. So that is one of the questions that we have here. And the second question, how should we work in a mixed ability class, which I believe is something that you face every day, especially when you have students coming, for example, a third grader coming into your group after 2 years because your students start in grade 1 or first grade. And then after 2 years, someone else comes to start in year 3. So how do you deal with mixed ability language competence in a bilingual classroom?
I think this is the biggest challenge here. Students of different level, I mentioned this in the presentation, students of different levels in the classroom. We have to adapt. Many times we have to adapt some of the activities, and so that this student is not left behind, and that this student starts feeling comfortable to produce language and to learn. And we have to talk a lot. We talk a lot with these students. We offer help and extra support to these students so we can be in the same, at least try to be in the same pace as the other kids. But I think this is the biggest challenge. And sometimes we have to adapt activities, and so we are able to reach all of these students, even if they are, even if they have started together in first grade, I would say. Some kids are more exposed to language at home, for example, so it is easier for some of them to follow the lesson and to understand what we are trying to teach. So we have to adapt. We have to adapt activities so we can get this student, we can have this student involved in the lesson too, and offer some support. If we have the linguistic support, it is like great. It is excellent if we have teachers of English in the school to offer this support for these students who are starting a little later, let's say.
Yeah, and I believe we need to be totally transparent to the family so that they adjust their aims, if I can put that way, or their expectations in relation to language development for very young bilingual learners, because there might be a lot of pressure coming from the family also as they compare kids that might have a different level of ability in the same classroom.
Mm-hmm. Or if
Okay.
the kid
Sorry.
may not be comfortable. It's just it might be this, the child is not comfortable to produce language, and then we have to respect, we have to consider that each one has their own pace, right? In this production of language.
Elisa, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Rafael.
We had wonderful ideas for young learners and very young learners. I think that your trajectory is actually an inspiration for teachers that are willing to transition from English language teaching to bilingual teaching. So thank you very much. You shared your contact information. So I'm pretty sure if I have educators here in the session who want to learn more from the experience Elisa has shared, she will be happy to talk to you later. Right, Elisa?
Yes, for sure. And I'm going to send you the link now in the chat box of that Professor Stephen Krashen's video. It's just a 3-minute video, but just for you to have an idea of what he talks about second language acquisition. I've just left the link in the chat box. And I'd like to thank you so much for having me here. It was great. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to invite one of my colleagues. I don't know if Rafa wants to share the results of the cities that are participating in this session today. We had a Mentimeter research. Would you like to share, Rafa?
I'm going to share my screen with you. So that's it. So we have had people from Dourados, from Pederneiras, Campo Grande, Três Lagoas, Belém, Ribeirão Preto in the house, right? Thank you, guys. We had people from Nova Lima, Tremembé, Parnaíba, Goiânia, Piracicaba, Santo André, Joinville, Curitiba, Rondonópolis, Jundiaí, Iporá. Eu lembro no chat, I read some people were from Rio. It was great having you guys here. Thank you so much for joining us. And see you again tomorrow, right?
Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Thank you. We hope we can see you tomorrow again. It'll be our last session with great Julio Vieitas on crisis management, how one can manage a school or private classes in a moment of uncertainties. I'm pretty sure it'll be an amazing talk. And thank you again for joining. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.